Welcome to The Being Leader. I'm Annabelle Graham. Welcome to this episode of The Being Leader, the podcast that discusses how we need to show up and be as leaders, reflecting on what impacts our behaviours, our relationships and our outcomes, and allows us to focus more on our approach to leading ourselves, our teams and our organisations. Today I'm joined by certified mindfulness and insight timer app teacher, coach, author and inspirational speaker, Christoph Spiessens. Christoph works with teams and organisations to bring secular mindfulness teachings to employees across all sectors and all levels in a practical and usable way. This enables positive outcomes that ripple through the organisation, but also help outside of work. Christoph, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us on The Being Leader.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Very welcome. So it'd be really great to find out a little bit from you about, what your background is and how you got to where you are now.
Gosh, that's a bold opening question.
Question for you to run through. You can wherever you fancy.
The long story short is that I was born and raised in Belgium. So in case people are wondering where the exotic accent is from. But I've been in the UK for almost 20 years and 18 of those in Manchester. So the Manc twang kicks in at random times. So it's a bit of a crossover accent, and it's a bit of, in terms of life experience, it's also a bit of a crossover mix between careers in the airline industry. I used to work for the Belgian national airline, but they went under after the events of 9/11, which is why I came to the UK, because I was cabin crew at the time. And that's kind of all I knew how to do, and I enjoyed doing. And I enjoyed traveling the world and meeting people and people from different cultures and visiting all these wonderful places. And that's what I wanted to carry on doing. And so I learned that Japan Airlines, who have a base at Heathrow Airport, were looking for multi-European language speaking cabin crew. And I was a good match at the time and spent a further 2 years working as cabin crew for them. And it was in Japan, so many, many years ago, where I had my first introductions to Buddhism and, in a way, mindfulness as well, because I really did not kind of understand that at the time in the way that I do now. But with hindsight, I can see that that time was a very rich time for me. Because one is very lonely as cabin crew. It sounds like a very social job, and it can be, but because of jet lag and the constant traveling, you get lonely, you get tired, and you do find yourself spending a lot of time by yourself. And so Japan is this weird and wonderful and beautiful place where that can hold space for a lonely or a lone traveler, so to speak. And so I was forever visiting the temples and the sacred spaces and places. And so I'm sure that we can kind of circle back to this at some point in the conversation. But then after my stint with Japan Airlines, I started my 15-year career in learning and development, because I had enough of flying. The jet lag got the better of me, and It was time to find a job, feet firmly on the ground, pardon the pun. And I became a soft skills trainer, so focusing on customer service, and then later leadership development in a contact center for a very well-known Middle Eastern based airline who also have offices across the UK.
I was wondering if you'd started in the airline industry and then moved over, because it's that natural transition of, if staying within the industry often allows you to transfer the type of role focus that we have.
Correct. Yeah. So although it was a very different role, it was the same industry. And then worked my way up the corporate ladder, so to speak, and became a learning and development manager for another company after that. And then I started my own training and coaching consultancy about 5.5 years ago. So that's me in a nutshell. And the type of workshops that I deliver these days, there has been a shift. It used to be your traditional, conventional soft skills training, like I said, but now I focus predominantly on helping people with the wonderful concept, tool, whatever one wishes to call it, that is mindfulness.
So I noticed you helpfully omitted where that came into the journey. So tell us about how you came across mindfulness and why it's become important to you.
So this is an interesting question, because it's not something that just happens as a one-off. I have found that mindfulness, the way I practice it today and the way I share it with people, is really the sort of, not so much end result, but the current result of a collection of a series of events in my own life that have really made me look into who am I as a person, why am I here, what is my purpose, how can I best help myself in moments of anxiety, for example. What do I need more of? What do I need less of? What's helpful for me, for my mind? What's helpful for my mind, body, spirit connection? And so what I do today is really the like I said, kind of the result of bringing all of that together. We need to go back to when I was a 10-year-old child, though, and I appreciate that what's coming up next is perhaps a little bit sensitive for some listeners, but I was sexually abused for 2 years by a man who was much, much older than me, and he was in a position of authority. And that was really without going into that, because that's not necessary, but that was really what put me onto the path of spiritual inquiry. It's like, why does this happen to me? Why does this happen to other people? Why do good people experience bad things in life? And so that was really the first kind of big event in my life, which was followed by other not so pleasant events, which we all have. We have that common humanity, as it is called. We all experience pain and deep sadness and trauma, or at least most of us do. But as I've grown older, I've realized that there was always something missing. And for a long time, it was my focus on practical spirituality that helped me to make sense of bad events, good events as well, and helped me to explore topics such as, who am I really? Am I more than who I see in the mirror? Am I perhaps a soul on a journey? Are the people I meet in my life, like this conversation that I'm having with you today, is that fate? Is it a freak occurrence? Is it going to be helpful to other people, and will that establish new connections? So I was always kind of looking at the bigger picture, and through spirituality, I was beginning to make sense of life and my life. But talking to many people and doing my workshops and looking at my own life, about 2 years ago, I realized that the spirituality alone was no longer doing its magic. And I can't believe I'm saying this. And actually, I think this is the very first time that I'm verbalizing this on a podcast. There was a need for more. And that need was mindfulness. And I didn't know it, but it would soon reveal itself to me. And what I mean by need is that there was this tremendous desire in my life to simplify my life again. And looking at the world around me and people and the state of the world and the state that people find themselves in, which on the outside is often very, very appealing and very wonderful, and all the bells and whistles, but on the inside, it's actually very often it's a different story. And I felt that people were also looking for something to ground themselves in, something to hold on to. And that was not too dissimilar for myself. And then mindfulness came on my path again. And then something clicked into place. And I was like, okay, now everything is beginning to make sense. And I can relate to, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 5 years ago, and now, and I can bring it all together. And so that's where I am now. And that's a very long answer to your question. But I just feel like a little bit of background is helpful when you listen to someone talk to why they do what they do. Because these days everyone is, and that includes myself, everyone is on the mindfulness bandwagon, and I'm very aware of that. So I always like to share a little bit why it is important and why it's helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think understanding that, you said this started way back in my childhood, and I think often we don't recognize that a lot of our behavior and a lot of the way that we're working, or the decisions that we're making, or the filtering that our mind is doing is based on behavior traits that served us well way back, that actually might not be serving us very well now. So actually that dialing into focus and starting to notice, why am I doing what I'm doing? Where did I learn to do that? And why is it now serving me, or is it not serving me, becomes really useful.
And
so
absolutely. And
presence piece.
The presence piece and learning to recognize patterns and cycles, and then undoing and unlearning.
Yeah. And that's so different.
Yeah.
It's finding the right replacement to get rid of the previous behavior that we often are. And sometimes we don't want to let those go either.
Well, in this is a big word I'm about to drop, but in a way it's an addiction. And I'm saying that with love, because I'm actually talking to my self-reflection, so to speak. It's an addiction. It's grooves in the brain, literally, pathways that we have created, and so it's challenging to undo that. And that is one of the many ways why I find mindfulness so helpful. It doesn't deny or ignore what's been or what is even, but it's about looking at what has been and what is through a lens of self-compassion and patience. And for me it was a huge game changer. And the peace and calm that potentially brings is, again, I'm hearing myself say this, and it's weird coming from someone who was on the self-help barricades for years, and fireworks motivational training, and go and busting through limited beliefs and this and that. And now I have changed. It's a much more compassionate approach. Because I don't not believe in conventional motivational and inspirational training, but we have a responsibility to our audiences to make sure that it's authentic, that it's real, and that it's not just a sticky plaster. That would be my observation about that.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about mindfulness, but I'm conscious there's going to be some people listening who don't know the term.
What is this spookiness?
Exactly. What's the witchcraft? And in that, actually, probably have a whole load of myths and definitions of what it is or it isn't, which could be or could not be right. So,
and do I need my meditation cushion? And do I need the incense?
Yeah. And what are those weighted blanket bits?
And those are very valid questions.
So how would you describe mindfulness to someone who's coming at it going, okay, explain this to me in a simple, practical way that I can understand?
Great question. And thank you for the opportunity to unpack this.
Mm.
In the spirit of mindfulness, I will keep this as simple and straightforward as I can.
Okay.
But then I said that about the previous 3 questions, and look how that ended. Look, mindfulness literally means to see clearly. To see clearly. Now, what does that mean? Seeing a situation or a person or an event as it is, without coloring in that situation with our own beliefs, prejudice, and all of that, which we do as human beings. It's a very natural thing to do. You see someone, you see an event, you see a notification on your phone, and you go into reactionary mode. And that's evolutionary based and helpful. If there's a tiger, you run. And even today, if the fire alarm goes off, you leave the building. But mindfulness is about creating some gentle breathing space. These are my own words now, between you and your thoughts, between you and the situation you find yourself in. And I'm going to stick with the fire alarm analogy for a moment, Annabelle, because even when the fire alarm goes off and you run, very often you could run down the wrong corridor and actually still find yourself in danger because of your doing the right thing, get out of this building kind of thing, behavior. But if fire alarm goes off and you take a nanosecond to assess the situation and then respond rather than react, you can usually leave the building alive and in one piece. And I think it's a good analogy to use because it's very similar to how you can apply mindfulness in your everyday life, from business to your personal life and everything in between. It's creating a gentle breathing space. If you want a slightly more clinical, academic, more well-known definition, let me go with the one from the wonderful Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is the creator of the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, and really the Western father of mindfulness. He brought mindfulness into the mainstream as we know it. And he says mindfulness is the awareness that arises from paying attention in a particular way. And that particular way is on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally.
Lovely, thank you for that. And I like that breathing space between you and your thoughts. It's that time to pause.
Mm.
And in some ways, as you said, we're really good at short-circuiting. And I think it's conditioning, and some of those are conditioned thoughts from whatever set of behavior, whether it be work learned behavior, childhood learned behavior, habit, whatever it may be. But also there's the shortcutting that we take just to deal with things, which is where that judgment piece comes in, I think, which allows us to overlook sometimes reality of what is, because we're skipping so quickly from those anchor points. So I like that breathing space to actually recognize where it is. So if you think about when you're working, whether it be with organizations or with clients, how does this become useful for them?
It's about upgrading your capacity for empathy, your capacity for, you have more tolerance, you have more compassion for others, you have more self-respect, you can self-regulate more. When you do all of these things, that extends to the way you relate to other people, which benefits the team, which ripples across the organization, which benefits the customer. I would say it's an upgrade in capacity. And that's, everyone can fill in what capacity means for them. But where you usually lose it, so to speak, that's where you want to apply some mindfulness. That would be a good place to start. And it can be simple things. I know people who lose it when they receive an email with the subject line message in capitals, which could be entirely accidental, but it's like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. I can wake up in the middle of the night with, say, a bellyache, for example, and then the next thing I know is I'm planning my funeral. So it's kind of like, whoa, 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 slow down. And we all have these, these little gremlins.
Yeah. So in some ways, it's a practice that allows us, and this is my words, sort of just trying to interpret back what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a practice that allows us to put that coping mechanism in when we have those emotional triggers that send us into a psychological threat state.
Yeah.
That can be used as an interrupt in some ways.
It's a safeguard. Yeah.
Safeguard, nice.
Yeah. And it sounds like, for all the right reason, I think initially it sounds like perhaps hard work. It is something that we need to do. And that brings me to the difference, which is a beautifully rich concept from the world of mindfulness, the difference between the doing mode and the being mode. And if it's okay with you, I would like to talk about this for a moment. Because doing is not really about being active and completing tasks and being ambitious. Those are necessary and wonderfully effective things. Doing is about us wanting a situation to be different. When we want to change something, and usually when we find ourselves being in the doing mode, we don't really like ourselves a great deal. Whereas when we can shift into the being mode with mindfulness, the being mode is a part of being mindful, you actually find yourself having that capacity to be with the situation as it is, without needing to change it. And you find yourself loving yourself a great deal more than when you're in the doing mode. And that doesn't mean that you become complacent or that you lose all of your responsibilities and you begin loving everything that's really unacceptable. That's not what I'm talking to. I would like to give you a very succinct example, if I may, based from my own experiences of moments of anxiety, because I'm an empath, and without wanting to go too woo-woo overboard, an empath is someone who is or can be sensitive to the energy of places and other people, and that's just a thing. So I could go to a restaurant, for example, and be with a group of people, friends or total strangers, and feel unease or anxious. And then there are two ways about that. You can fight it, which, as you will have guessed, makes the situation worse. And can lead to a full-blown fight or flight situation, which is really something you don't want to wish on your worst enemy, because it's not pleasant. But it's funny, because the more I talk to people about this, the more people actually say, oh my God, I have that too. And I'm like, oh, well, there you go. That's the magic of talking about your stuff. That's the power of vulnerability. But Chris, you're so calm. I say, I am calm, but I'm not a robot either. We all have, we are sensitive. We are not connected to the world around us. Anyway, so I'm in a restaurant, and then as soon as I feel that coming on, I invite myself into the being mode, which is like, hey, you don't need to change anything about the situation. You also can't change anything about this situation, because this is a restaurant and it is a safe space and these are nice people. And why don't you just enjoy what is, rather than needing something to be a certain way? And then with that, there's this sense of self-appreciation that comes back. Like, I matter too in this group of people. It's not just them versus me. It's like, we are a group of people, and I have something that I can contribute. And so before you know it, with mindfulness, you create that capacity, that for holding holding yourself differently.
Mm.
And I find it very helpful. And that's why I really thrive on sharing it with people. So not doing, but being more. And I believe this is the title of your podcast as well.
It is indeed. It's interesting, as you were talking about that, 2 or 3 things came up for me. So one was around that being in the moment and recognizing the stuckness, as it were, that uncomfortableness that's there,
the quicksand,
which is really difficult for people, and I think especially within the organizational context, and because that could be, I don't get on with Fred, or my boss is a pain in the backside, or whatever it is, and actually that's all judgment, but it's that recognition of, oh, I need to have a conversation about this and I don't want to do it, therefore we avoid, because actually it's uncomfortable. So that just recognizing sometimes that we find it uncomfortable and being willing to sit with it and voice it allows us in some ways to take an alternative view. So I wonder if it's even that piece about, maybe pulling out and looking at this as the third party observer of going, so what's going on here? The second thing that came up as you were talking, and this actually was linking to your example that you shared. And I wonder if in a situation like that, if that's your anxiety or somebody else's anxiety in the group that you actually are tapping into from an energy point of view and picking up.
Both, without a doubt. But if I may briefly share something about this. So for years I was, and again, I'm putting my heart on the line here. For years I was like, oh, I'm an empath and I'm so sensitive and da-da-da. And now I'm like, yes, I'm still an empath, but that doesn't mean I can blame other people for that. Do you see what I mean? There's a great difference. And I have found myself in more than one argument with fellow empaths. Because guess what? It turns out on some level, we are all empaths. Like I said, we are all connected. And the way that the world is going at the moment, we're all becoming more sensitive to one another. So you need to take responsibility for that.
Absolutely.
And mindfulness can help because it's compassion towards others, but also towards self.
You heard of systemic constellations?
I have.
Yeah. So I use constellations quite a bit, and I think when I first went through my constellations training, you go to the first and constellations, for those listening, is very much about when you're working with the forces within the system, within a group of people, and actually what you're doing is you're tapping into it somatically. So you're tapping into the energy that is there within the group and understanding what that might be or where it might sit. So the first time you go to an open workshop, it looks a bit like witchcraft, because people are literally voicing somebody else's thoughts and process by tapping into the energy that they're producing. But by the second part of it, I discovered that unfortunately, I've got a very high degree of emotional control, so I can switch it on and off like a tap. And I think for years I'd ignored the fact that I can tap into it exceedingly easily because it's so odd when you do. And that's very much the piece that you were describing, that's that ability to pick up on other people's on the energy and the feelings that's going on. So I could pick up, for example, tension, and it might sit like I've got a really sore neck, or especially now when we're all in Zoom meetings, you're sat there and you think, God, I've obviously been sat here for too long. And I've had this in workshops recently where I'd said to the person I was co-delivering with, I had such a sort of stiff neck last night by the time we'd finished it. And we were going into day 2 with the same group. And then I sat there and thought, no, I felt fine when I sat down this morning. I've just developed this. This has nothing to do. This is the group. And that awareness of in the moment when something's going on, of being able to notice and disassociate and notice as it is something that's very useful, but rarely done.
I'm really grateful you brought this up, Annabelle, because as I mentioned earlier, the mindfulness in my life today is the result of many different dots connecting, right? And one of the last dots is more recent, like I said, about 2 years ago, and it so inconveniently happened when I was really becoming successful in my own business, working with larger groups of people, a bigger stage here and there, and things were beginning to pick up. And with that came the heightened sensitivity to everything. And I was like, oh my God, why now? Like,
more people, more energy.
More people, exactly that. Yeah. Exactly that. But also, so that's the not blaming kind of piece, but also the days leading up to the event, the rumination, the anxiety building, the mind thinking, who do you think you are? What are you doing? The imposter syndrome, the whole shebang, right? We all know about that. And that really was like, I need to get a grip on this. I want to get a handle on this. And I returned to mindfulness, or mindfulness came onto my path once more. And then really everything kind of clicked into place beautifully. Because why am I saying this? Because one part of mindfulness that I really appreciate, again, this is not something that I would have said 5 years ago, far from, is the neuroscience of mindfulness. And I know you and I had a little conversation before we started recording today's podcast, but you mentioned you were reading something on the topic of mirror neurons. And indeed, just to briefly share this with the listeners in case they don't know, but because I didn't know, mirror neurons really are what make us yawn when we see somebody else yawn, for example, or we cry when we see other people cry, etc., or you're more likely to do so. And there is a proven link between empaths and their more highly developed mirror neurons. So that was the woo-woo becoming more clinical, more real, more mundane. And it was like, do you know what? But this is actually really helpful, because I am even, I do consider myself a spiritual being, which I believe human beings are. We are a spiritual being having a human experience. And as part of that, so why do we try to run away from that all the time? We are a human being, and with that comes a mind, with that comes a brain, with that comes an energy system that is around us. So why not explore that a little bit more? And I find, and I know people can't see this, but what I'm doing with my fingers is kind of, I'm drawing 3 circles. And it's, for me, mindfulness is the intersection of spirituality, of neuroscience, and well-being. And it's that sweet spot. That's where I find mindfulness, because you can make it as woo-woo or as clinical as you wish. And there's an invitation to explore that on your own terms with someone who can help you.
And in some ways, it's where the comfortableness is for people.
Yeah.
Depending on which side that they're coming from.
Yeah.
And, and God, if we went back, 12, 14 years, we wouldn't have all the neuroscience research, because most of it wasn't there.
No, correct.
Mainly just because we hadn't, clinically it hadn't got that far down the line. But being able to give, I think often, in our world of L&D, we use models, we use concepts, because they're a skeleton that allows people to make sense of things.
Yeah.
It's that structure that allows me to understand that concept in a logical way. Because that in my brain is, I think I'm being logical all of the time, even though, you and I know you're not. 95% of it is emotion. It's the little inner chimp having a field day. But it makes people feel better because they think it's logical. So that's fine.
You're right. And you mentioned the word chimp. Do you know, many listeners will be familiar with the Chimp Paradox book, which I haven't read.
I talk about it a lot. I have it here.
I haven't read it, but I've held it in my, but wait, I've read that kids version of that book, my hidden chimp.
Yeah.
And because I'm a bit of a visual learner, and which is weird because now I'm studying for a master's degree in mindfulness. So it's like, yeah, go figure. Like I said, the whole spectrum, right?
Of course.
But something needs to put you on the path of exploration, and something needs to lower the threshold. And for me, it was that book, because it made it very clear, like there's something going on over there. Befriend it.
Yeah, very much so. I've been known to. It's a model I usually at some point in a coaching program, and usually always in a leadership program, we'll talk about it, because it gets people to start to understand why you do what you do. But I've been known to, when we have a particularly active chimp, shall we say, people have drawn it. So we've actually created a whole picture and image of it, and because by manifesting that, I can deal with it better.
Absolutely. Naming it, giving it an image, whatever works for people, but something to make it more concrete.
Absolutely. So I know part of the work that you do is mindfulness within teams.
That's right. So
tell me a little bit more about that and how you go and introduce that into that context, because I'm thinking about some of the teams I work with and think, I mean, they all think Annabelle's a little bit bonkers at the best of times, but possibly might look at me strangely if I went in with that. So talk to me more about that.
So you see, you and I seem to have similar brands in that you're a bit bonkers, to use your words. I have directors who literally, there's this one wonderful person who says, Chris, I need you to come in and do your stuff. And he still can't put his finger on it, but he knows it works. Yeah. And that's like my brand. Chris, let him do his stuff. Anyway, okay. So the first part of your question, why does it work? How is it helpful to teams, perhaps? Well, if you can understand yourself better through mindfulness, then you can understand the people on the team better. And you can see the bigger picture, what frustrates you, what drives you, you begin to see that in other people. All of you on the team become more responsive and less reactive, and things blossom from there. So that would be the first answer to that question. You can all be in the being mode more often. That doesn't it sound contradictory to being productive and being creative? And no, it's actually the exact opposite. When you are in the being mode, that empathy flows, the creativity flows, the productivity will follow as a result. Whereas some people perform very well under pressure. There's different types of pressure, usually in an office environment. Can I say that very often it's the wrong type of pressure? It's the forced, suffocating, goals obsessed pressure. And I get it. Businesses need to make money, but they would make money more money and faster, I think, with a more mindful approach. So, and then your second question, how do I present it to businesses? Interestingly, most people seem to find me through the kind of content that I post on my social media channels, including LinkedIn. And they get a feel for who you are and what you stand for, and whether that's how you present that. Is it just something fluffy, or does it come fluffy backed up with some science, and does he or she knows what they are talking about? And I think it's striking that balance that people find inspirational. So that is usually my foot in the door, so to speak. Or people have listened to my own podcast, or they've read my books, because I've got 2 books out. And so it's a combination of those things. Or they can hear you give a talk, and maybe they sit in the back of the room and then they want to learn a little bit more about you. It's changing, but it's not really that it's call after call after call. Chris, can you come and book? Can I book a mindfulness workshop for my team? No, we're not quite there yet, but it's beginning to change because mindfulness is becoming more well known. And it's also offered through the NHS, by the way, as you probably know, in the form of MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And I don't do that. I'm not a clinical therapist, but I mean, it's getting a lot more credence. And fortunately and unfortunately, decision makers need to see a projection of the return on their investment. They want to see, and it goes through a process, as we both know.
But I think with this year, especially in some ways, it's been. Have you noticed its interest has been dialed up?
Yes, I had a very clearly I've not processed it yet because I had a someone who's rather well known in their field of expertise say to me, what you do is essential, but it's not a priority. And my heart sank a little bit in that moment. And what he meant was businesses don't have budgets for the well-being stuff right now because businesses are trying to survive this 2020 year. And I was like, yeah, do you know what? That sucks, but I get it and I understand it. So I applied mindfulness to it. I was like, I meet you with compassion here in this moment, because what's the alternative? Being frustrated, that's not going to help anyone. So I think the balance is tipping in favor of more well-being initiatives, but it's really important, in my opinion, to bring mindfulness and interventions or initiatives to the organization in the right way, and not just in a, it has to be in a I'm looking for the right word here, so I'm going to stop doing that because I'm in the doing mode right now. I'm going to shift to the being mode. It has to be in a way that is respectful of the audience that it's looking to serve, and that's the teams and the individuals. And if it's offered because it's a tick box exercise, then it's the same thing as the bowl of fruit in the staff canteen. You need a bit more than that. It needs to be more grounded.
Yeah. So if we've got people listening who are thinking, okay, how I get that this is a breathing space. This is about noticing. It's about recognizing, in some cases, what's going on and measuring my response to that, so it's not an immediate reaction. So how do I go about practicing that? How do I learn that?
Well, I'm going to share an example that will be recognizable to all of us listening, and it's from a workshop that I'm actually delivering tomorrow to teams, and it's about more mindful meetings. So if you want to practice mindfulness, why don't you start with being more mindful of how you show up for a meeting, for example. And I'm not talking about, do I look good? Have I got fuel in my system? Is there a glass of water on the table? That's not what I'm talking to. That's helpful.
Have I got more than just my slippers on?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is the Zoom generation. Right?
It is whole different year of meetings this year.
But and I'm also not just talking about, am I clear on the intentions and the objectives and the KPIs and everything that comes with performance reviews, meetings, for example, and all of that. It's the, how am I showing up? What do I need? Where is my mind right now? Is my mind still with the previous meeting, or is my mind with the meeting, not the next one, but the one after that, which I'd rather be at? Or is my mind already with the garage because I need to collect my car because it's had an MOT? Do I need to pick the kids up from school? Blah, 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 blah. The overactive mind, which is normal, and it happens to all of us, the spontaneous activation of the mind. But how well do you manage that? Because it will literally sit in the way of you being present and showing up and holding space for that person or the people you're about to meet with. So start with that. How am I managing this short breathing space between the meeting that's just been and the one that's about to happen? And then do that again after that meeting. And throughout the meeting itself, be mindful of where your mind wanders off to. Because it does. I mean, studies have proven that the mind spends it's almost 50%, 50% of the time not in the now moment. So that's scary. It's like half of the time you're not being present. So yeah, I think that would be a concrete example of how you can be more mindful.
And I think a really nice one, especially with the back-to-back video call fatigue that I think the world has moved into. In theory, working from home was a great idea, but we haven't changed our habits for how we run meetings. We just do the same thing.
Yes, and because we are so more easily accessible, we think we need to be available in equal measure. And if you're not, it may come with a sense of guilt, all of that, which I'm sure we can all relate to.
Absolutely.
I can't recall the name of the person, but I heard only a few weeks ago a beautiful metaphor for this space between meetings. And that person said to me, or I heard it somewhere, it doesn't matter. In the olden days, when we listened to records, between songs, there's this bigger groove that creates that space. Whereas now, on iTunes and all of that, anything digital, one song goes straight into the next song, and then the one after that. So it's about how can you bring back that groove between two activities in your day? And I thought, you know what, that is so beautiful.
It is. And I would add on there, how do you also get the dead static at the end of the first side?
And how does that not freak you out? Yeah. Because silence is a scary thing to many people.
I know. It's there's two bits when I end up training sort of either managers to coach or new coach practitioners, which I don't get to do anywhere near as often as I like. But there's two things I say to them. One is you really got to get comfortable with silence and not speaking and just shut up. And the second is at some point when you're sat with even though we as coaches are supposed to be amazingly focused, going back to your 50% of the time your brain is there. At some point in the middle of a coaching session, you will sit there and you will have no clue what that person has been saying for the last 5 minutes because you have just lost attention. And it's having that elegant little phrase that you can just bring back in to continue the conversation without showing that you weren't listening.
That you were on Mars, yeah.
Exactly. That you actually were going through the Tesco shop in your head or whatever it may be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we are human. We can't, as much as we would love to be there 100% of the time, it's not always doable. So if you were to give one or two tips to people as we wrap up our conversation today to go into their working day a little more mindfully, what would they be?
Try it. That's the first one. As in, mindfulness is intentionally paying awareness, to the present moment. Paying attention, not paying awareness. So do it with intention. And whether that is making the bed or preparing your next keynote, be aware of your why, and don't overanalyze it, but you will find that it will keep you more in the now moment and it will stop the mind from wandering. So have a play with that. Other things is to mindful up a routine task. When you brush your teeth, for example, which is something that you more than likely do on autopilot, i.e. you don't think about what you're doing, which is actually really scary when you think about that. You do so much on autopilot. And some of that is great, like breathing, for example. If you had to consciously be mindful of every breath that you take all day long, you would have died 30 years ago.
Exactly.
Because you can't keep that up. And yet it's wonderful when you do spend a few minutes with the breath, but that's a different conversation. Although that could be one of these things that you could mindful up. Like, I'm going to sit for a few minutes and just follow my breath in and out, without changing that breath, just following its natural rhythm. If that feels comfortable to you, I have to say, because it's not for everyone. But it's a way of reconnecting with your body and with yourself. And it's a way of bringing that mind to the now moment instead of your Tesco shopping list. But to come back to brushing your teeth, so I'm about to pick up my toothbrush, and actually I'm aware that I'm picking up this toothbrush. Holding this toothbrush, what does it feel like? What does that? Gosh, never realized it's actually quite plasticky. No, is this plastic? No, it's kind of like a rubbery plastic. What is this? So using the senses. If you want to sniff your toothbrush, by all means, go ahead and sniff your toothbrush. If you want to rattle it, see if it makes a sound. Anyway, you know what I mean. Just apply your senses. And when you do that, you bring the mind back to that moment. But do it without judgment. That's the key and very often overlooked cornerstone of mindfulness, is without judgment. This is a toothbrush. This is not like an ugly, awfully short, long, soft, hard toothbrush. No, it's a toothbrush. And that's where the story ends. And see how you can actually stay with just that toothbrush and how hard that is. And do this, repeat throughout the brushing process until you put the toothbrush away again. And then try that for when you put the kettle on for a cup of coffee. And be with that experience. Normally, what you do when you put the kettle on is you're doing a million other things, often to the point where you've actually forgotten why you were in the canteen or in the kitchen in the first place. So, yeah, again, long answer to a short and useful question, but it's about mindfulling up a routine task. Start with that, without the judgment.
I like the mindfulling up.
And when we're allowed out again, after these lockdowns, see how you fare when you are in contact with people again in the queue at the supermarket, or when you're in traffic, and this lady or this guy or whoever it is who's just cut you up, cut in front of you in the traffic. See if you notice your reaction, which is usually not a very pretty one. Now, where does that come from? And how does that reaction help me? Do you know what? It comes from the fact that actually my brain is literally trying to protect me here. It's a reaction. It's a natural, helpful, limbic-driven reaction because I was in a position of danger for a moment. But I am no longer in that situation of danger. So am I now going to still call that person an XYZ? Or am I going to respond to the situation and just say, that was funny, I reacted, it was helpful, but it was not necessary, and I can let it go. And as you begin to do that more and more, your reactionary also becomes more and more fine-tuned, so to speak. Because the idea is not to become reactionary. It's necessary and life saving.
Yes.
But it's how you manage it.
Which is where the breathing piece comes in.
Yeah. So do those examples make sense? Yeah.
They do, absolutely.
And if you want to explore meditation, mindfulness meditation, then that is definitely something I would highly recommend. But it doesn't have to be the start of your mindfulness journey. And I think it draws many people to mindfulness, but it also puts people off exploring mindfulness, I think, because meditation sounds very esoteric, very Eastern, very, and it doesn't have to be that. It can be.
Yeah.
And mindfulness, of course, has very rich connections to Buddhism, but you can, yes, you can practice it in a secular way. It is perfectly possible. Yeah.
And I think it's finding the routine that's comfortable for others, for each person.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you've definitely given some great examples there. So if people want to find out more about you, where should they connect with either your writings or your podcasts or whatever?
So I suppose the website is a good place to start, christophspiessens.com. If you want to explore some secular and safe and gentle mindfulness meditations, you can find them on the website or on the Insight Timer app, where I have a teacher profile, and of course LinkedIn and other social media.
Fabulous. Well, look, Chris, thank you for joining us today. It's been a fascinating conversation. I've really loved it. We've gone round the houses and varying different routes, and it's been really good. So thank you for coming on.
Thanks again for having me. Really appreciate it.
So this episode is going to be our last for a while, because we're going to take a break over Christmas. And I really wanted to end on the theme of mindfulness, to get people to think about actually just taking some time out to reconnect, to focus after a year which has tested people in so many ways. And if this episode's been useful, then why don't you go back and check out some of the previous ones which we've discussed on a similar theme? So reflection, resilience with Sarah Jones, or being useful with Joss Burton. I'd like to wish you all the very best for 2021 and thank all of my guests who've joined me over the last 6 months. And we'll see you in the next series. Thanks for listening to The Being Leader.